just got to ask, what kind of culture exists in the United States of America that in the wake of what we have seen Hamas do to Israel, how can somebody like Rashida Tlaib rise to the level of representation and power in the United States government as she has? Well, we are welcoming Alan Dershowitz to the Annie Frey Show here. He's a professor emeritus at Harvard Law. He is also an author and a civil rights attorney. His latest book is War Against the Jews, How to End Hamas Barbarism. Mr. Dershowitz, thank you so much for the time today. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad you put on the statements of Congresswoman Tlaib. She has a long history of anti-Semitic outbursts, and unfortunately, she represents her constituents in a district that is heavily anti-Israel, heavily pro-Hamas. And I have to tell you about a ceasefire. A ceasefire would cause more deaths than Israel destroying Hamas. If there were a ceasefire and Israel could not destroy Hamas, Hamas has already said what they would do. They would attack Israel again and again and again and kill more and more Israeli civilians. Israel would then respond, and they would use human shields, put babies and children in harm's way, and the end result would be many more lives. So the best way to save lives is absolutely no ceasefire, and that is the complete and total victory of Israel over Hamas, the same way it saved lives for the United States to have total victory over Germany and over Japan. You know, the dropping of the atomic bomb saved lives. 100,000 people were killed, yes, but many, many more hundreds of thousands would have been killed if the United States Armed Forces, Marines, had to invade the islands of Japan. So sometimes you have to take actions that will result in the taking of life to save life. This is particularly true when the taking of lives results from Hamas using these babies, these children, these women as human shields in order to get Israel to kill them so that they can parade them in front of TV cameras. They have a name for it. They call it the CNN strategy. I call it the dead baby strategy. The strategy has worked. They kill Israelis. They know Israel has to respond. They put their fighters and their rockets in civilian areas, knowing that there'll be some civilian casualties, far less than in any other wars. But then they parade these babies in front of the TV cameras, and the world turns against Israel, and Hamas wins the publicity war, and then they do it again and again and again. So you want to save lives? Destroy Hamas.
Man, Alan Dershowitz speaking with us right now. He is a professor emeritus at Harvard Law and an author. His latest book, War Against the Jews, How to End Hamas Barbarism. One of the things that Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib there said when she was trying to, I guess, explain her words, not excuse her words because she doesn't seem to want to retract any of them. She refers to a time when she was living there where there was a coexistence of all faiths living in peace. How is Rashida Tlaib in Congress? How do you get to be in Congress and still believe that there is some sort of coexistence of these two parties with all faiths living in peace? I mean, there was a ceasefire before October 7th, and Hamas is the one who broke that.
And they have broken every ceasefire that has been arranged. And, you know, the idea that Hamas wants peace, just read their charter. They would not be satisfied, even if Israel ended, as they did end, the occupation of Gaza, even if they ended the occupation of the West Bank, because Hamas and Rashida Tlaib believe that all of Israel is occupied territory, that Tel Aviv is occupied, that the areas of Sderot and these kibbutzim where these innocent people were slaughtered, she believes they're occupied territory. So, you know, it's a myth that you can ever live in peace with Hamas. Hamas has to be destroyed. It's like saying that the French had to live in peace with the Nazi occupation of Paris. Nazism was a complete evil, and so is Hamas. And evil has to be destroyed, and you don't have ceasefires with evil. Now, if the Hamas wants to trade a brief ceasefire for the return of all the hostages, that's something Israel might very well want to consider. But to get a ceasefire without any quid pro quo, without any return of hostages, no, of course not. That would just encourage Hamas to kill more and more and more civilians and use more and more and more of their civilians as human shields.
We're speaking with Alan Dershowitz about his book, War Against the Jews, How to End Hamas Barbarism. You made a statement there about how Congresswoman Tlaib and Hamas agree, and then you kind of explained what their agreement is. You don't become a congressional representative without having some popularity in your beliefs. And these are not new beliefs that Tlaib is articulating now that have gotten her censured in the House of Representatives. What kind of culture has existed under the surface in the United States of America that is now spoiling out into the open in the midst of this Hamas attack on Israel?
Yeah, and you understand how she can get elected to Congress, but what is harder to understand is to have 33 groups of Harvard students, people I taught for 50 years at Harvard, could, on the day after these massacres, rapes, beheadings were revealed, write a statement saying Israel was entirely responsible for all these rapes. This comes from Harvard students, from students at major universities. And so the problem goes deeper than Tlaib and goes deeper than Congress. It goes to our future, because if this is what the 20, 21-year-old students today believe, in 10 years, they're going to be running for Congress.
What I want to ask you about more about these college protests. They're all over the country. I think we often see college kids protesting, and you kind of, on a much lower level, on an issue much simpler than this, think, good for you going out and exercising your First Amendment and being active and passionate about something. But there's so much misinformation and hate that exists in some of these protests that we're seeing. How do we get to this point, and how do we get away from it?
Well, first of all, there hasn't been a single pro-Palestine protest. That's what the media calls it, pro-Palestine. I haven't seen a single sign calling for a two-state solution. These are all anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, anti-two-state solution, anti-Palestinian rights. That's what these protests are, and they shouldn't be labeled as pro-Palestinian. If you're pro-Palestinian, as I am, I'm in favor of the two-state solution, then you're anti-Hamas, not pro-Hamas. The Palestinian people have been enslaved, essentially, by Hamas. And, when Palestinian people civilians wanted to go south pursuant to Israel's instructions, they were killed on the way by Hamas soldiers. And it took Israel to rescue the Palestinians and to escort them to safe areas in the south. So if you want to be pro-Palestinian, be on the side of destroying Hamas. That's the most Palestinian thing you can do.
Last question for you. We're speaking with Alan Dershowitz. Sure. He's a professor emeritus at Harvard Law. He's an author. His latest book, War Against the Jews, How to End Hamas Barbarism. You have to have great resolve on what we're going to do as a country, administratively and defensively in and with Israel. And it seems as though the Democrat Party, which is in power in the Oval Office right now, has a very split party on the particular issue of support with Israel. How does the American administration do what they need to do to fortify and strengthen our relationship with Israel under this party that seems to be conflicted?
Well, it's conflicted, but the vast majority of Democrats support Israel. The vast majority of them voted to support Israel when Congress had the vote. Some voted against it. Some stayed home. It is a split party, but it's split more like 80-20 than it is like 50-50. And the important thing is to marginalize the squad, marginalize the extremists. I've made an offer. I've been a Democrat since I voted for, John Kennedy in 1960. I will support any Republican or any other Democrat who runs against any member of the squad or any member of Congress who voted against the support of Israel. And because I think that has to be a bipartisan issue. And I'm hoping that people like Tlaib will be primaried and others in the squad will be primaried, because scratch an anti-Israel person deep enough and you'll find an anti-American person. You'll find somebody who hates Western democracy, who hates the Judeo-Christian tradition, who hates not only Israel and not only Jews, but hates Christians, hates Americans. That's how deep the hatred really goes.
Well, I will tell you, here in St. Louis, where we are, Cori Bush, our representative, and an obnoxious,
she is the worst.
An embarrassing member of the squad.
Worst.
Well,
she is the worst. And I will want to make a pledge here. if anybody wants to primary Cori Bush, if anybody wants to run against her, I will come and campaign personally, contribute, do anything in my power to defeat Cori Bush. She is, of all the squad members, the most bigoted, the most anti-Semitic, the most anti-American, and the most despicable member of Congress there is. She makes Tlaib seem reasonable.
Well, Mr. Dershowitz, I would like to introduce you to a man named Wesley Bell, who has announced that he is running and has a name here in St. Louis. And I'm going to send that clip to him, and you might get a phone call.
Please tell him he can use it any way he wants.
Thank you so much for the time today, Mr. Dershowitz. We appreciate you.
Anytime. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. He's a professor emeritus at Harvard Law. He's a civil rights attorney. You can read his writings at dersh.substack.com. You can follow him on Twitter. Maybe tell him hello from the Annie Frey Show and the Wesley Bell camp at Alan Dersh. Weird sentences that we never thought we'd be saying here on the Annie Frey Show. He's the author of War Against the Jews, How to End Hamas Barbarism. Brad, I need you to make a phone call to Wesley Bell. You got it?
I'm going to find it. It was like, hey, you'll never believe what I just heard.
He just left the room, and he's getting him on the phone right now. Man, there's something behind that. I love watching Alan Dershowitz. I love listening to him. He is a Democrat. He has helped represent Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. There's just something about being around somebody who's principled, who has their own values, their own principles, and those principles, this is what integrity looks like, folks. They don't match up 100% with anybody else's, because how could your principles possibly? I would really love, going back to the first segment today, for the Republican Party to take note. Because if you have common interests and common goals, you can come together on the things that are common and do amazing things. Or you can only highlight the differences and dwell on them and be very comfortable losing with excuses every time you step in to fight because you already know who you're going to blame. Principles and values. Very refreshing to have here on the Annie Frey Show with Alan Dershowitz.